American companies should not be compensating officers based upon compliance with either DEI or ESG criteria, particularly these net zero goals. If a company is still pursuing a bonus plan that benefits people for meeting net zero goals, then people should know that something's wrong there and they're not looking out for your best interest.
Joining me this week is someone who's become a great friend. He is someone that you probably know. If not, you know some retail fast food outlets he led, Carl's Jr.'s and Hardee's. Hopefully you participated as a customer in those. And you might also know him as someone who has so much common sense about what companies should do in order to make a profit, serve their customers and their shareholders. He's written a book, A Tyranny for the Good of Its Victims. Think about that. A tyranny for the good of its victims. My friend, Heritage visiting fellow, and all-around great guy, patriot Andy Puzder. Thanks for making time.
Well, thanks for doing this, Kevin. I appreciate it very much.
You know, it's against my will. No, just kidding. You and I often banter via text, so we're just going to introduce the audience into that, which hopefully means this will be an entertaining episode. But all kidding aside, you are a very accomplished fellow. Actually, a great life story, typical American dream story, which is many people have experienced, but in your case, also very special. And you've got a lot of expertise to offer. You wouldn't say that about yourself because I've learned you're an extremely modest fellow. But for people who don't yet know you, man, all of you in the audience are in for a treat. You know a lot.
Well, thank you. I hope I
live up to that
now. Yeah.
Why did you write the book?
Well, the subtitle is The Ugly Truth About Stakeholder Capitalism. And we really need to get the word out about what these massive asset management firms are doing to our democracy, our free market economy, and our individual liberty with their imposition of stakeholder capitalism as a way to implement a very progressive, leftist, woke political and social agenda. And I've been working with people at Heritage. I mean, Heritage has played a big role in this. We've been working with you, with Andy Alavastro, with Bridget Wagner, getting the word out through a number of groups as to what I call the tyranny for the good of its victims, which is these financial firms thinking they know how to run our lives better than we know how to run our lives, and deciding to make a circle around a shortcut around the ballot box and to get their policies passed and force CEOs to do things they wouldn't otherwise normally do. And I think everybody sees the evidence of that. You don't have to be paying a whole lot of attention to know that corporations are doing things that just seem ridiculous when you discuss them. And then they use our money to do it. So it's an attack on our individual liberty as well. And so I wrote the book to explain all of that.
And you do a very good job of explaining it. A couple of examples that I've heard you mention recently that I think are very helpful are if you are someone who's wondered why Bud Light went woke when their business model rests almost exclusively on selling beer to men, and why a company like ExxonMobil would endorse net zero, or what we would more commonly in the United States called Green New Deal programs, when its business model rests upon fossil fuels, and they've been the best in the world at doing that. The answer to that is this so-called stakeholder capitalism.
Yes.
Explain what that is for the average person.
Sure. So say the subtitle of the book is The Ugly Truth About Stakeholder Capitalism. And the ugly truth is that it isn't capitalism at all. It's in fact, it's an attempt to destroy free market capitalism. It's a collectivist ideology. I call it socialism in sheep's clothing, that's designed to empower a group of financial elites, the individuals who run the largest asset management companies in the world, to empower these individuals to impose their social and political goals on us, all in the name of helping us, of benefiting us, because they don't trust us. They don't trust us to make decisions for ourselves, for our nation, or for the planet. That's really a rejection of democracy. It's a rejection of free markets because they empower the people. They empower us. This was the idea when our country was founded. And stakeholder capitalism would deprive us of those benefits. So they're big advocates of it. Now, as you said, people, sometimes people say, is this really happening? Well, I said, all you have to do is look around. You gave some great examples. How about Disney? Why would a family-friendly brand decide it was going to advance the transgender agenda? You've already talked about the net zero compliance goals that oil companies set. None of that makes any sense. And the reason they do it is because there really is a group of financial elites, the people who run the largest asset management firms in the world, BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, who are imposing on the American business community a radical, social, woke, cultural agenda, and it has devastatingly bad consequences for businesses, which is one of the reasons they're pretending to back off of it now. It has not been very productive economically. But more importantly, it puts the decision-making power on really major issues that should be decided by our representative democracy. It puts them in place to make those decisions for us. And to describe a little bit better what it is, when you in normal free market capitalism, if you are an asset manager, you're answerable to investors. You hire an asset manager to manage your investments because you want to get a return. And in fact, under traditional law, asset managers have a fiduciary obligation. They have a duty to maximize returns for their investors. Well, the stakeholder capitalists kind of didn't like that because you can't really maximize returns for your investors if you're making the companies in which you invest their money pursue these political and social goals that have nothing to do with profitability and may diminish profitability. So they needed a broader set of duties that they owed to an expanded group of people. So Klaus Schwab of World Economic Forum fame in the 1950s came up with this idea of stakeholder capitalism, which means basically that companies owe a duty, aren't just responsible to their shareholders. They're responsible to anybody that is even remotely affected by their company. So their consumers, their employees, their suppliers, their communities, which really is a proxy for society. It just means society. That's who they're trying to get at because they want to be able to implement social goals as opposed to implementing these profit-focused goals that maximizing returns for your investors. So by setting up this alternative group of stakeholders, which it's really interesting because they're called stakeholders, but they have no stake in the business whatsoever. They're actually not stakeholders, but they're called stakeholders. It's an amorphous group of people. It's really not defined. And that group really has no say over whether these policies that these asset managers want to implement are good or bad for them. There's no election, right? So society doesn't speak through the election. There's no free market purchases. So society's not speaking through free market purchases. They're just stuck. There's a void there. And these asset managers fill that void and say, well, we'll tell you what's good for you. We'll tell you what social purposes you need to accomplish. Just listen to us, just follow us. So what they end up with in stakeholder capitalism is that they go from being answerable to investors who will hold them responsible for returns on their investments to this amorphous group of non-investor stakeholders who hold them responsible for nothing. Because if society can't speak through elections or free market purchases, there is no way for society to express its will. So you have these collectivist elites who want to come in and fill that void.
And not a coincidence at all that the progenitor of the World Economic Forum,
Yes.
Klaus Schwab, came up with this ridiculous concept.
Not a coincidence at all. That's really a very dangerous concept. As I say, socialism in sheep's clothing. They use the agenda they want to enforce, they call ESG. Environmental, social, and governance. Now, they've tried to walk that back because people understand, now that we understand what it actually means. It actually means some very dangerous and unproductive things. But they implemented it. It's much like for those of your watchers here who've ever read 1984 by George Orwell. In 1984, the government set up this language. They call it Newspeak. And Newspeak was just a bunch of good-sounding phrases that didn't mean anything so that the government could fill in the meaning for those phrases. And you kind of get that with ESG. It's environmental, social, and governance. Well, who doesn't want a clean environment? Who doesn't want people to be treated fairly? Who doesn't want corporations to be well governed? Well, everybody wants those things. Unfortunately, that's not what ESG is about at all. But that's the point at which you were supposed to stop thinking about it. And there's a group of people, I call them the resistance in the book, And the resistance got started back around 2020. And this Heritage played a real role in facilitating this group. There were people kind of dispersed who were talking about these issues. Heritage pulled them together and really helped them to be more effective. But in any event, this group was out there trying to get the word out on this, which at first was very difficult. No, I would give talks. I started to give talks about this in 2020, and you'd say ESG, and everybody's eyes would glaze over, like nobody wanted to hear about it, nobody cared about it. I'd offer to speak about it, and people would say, "Andy, can't you give one of your capitalism versus socialism speeches or something?" I can't. We don't want you to talk about this.
You were a man on a mission.
Yeah, I was pushing, and but it changed. It changed. There was in 2022 in July, ALEC had an event in D.C.
The American Legislative Exchange Council.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Steve Moore, Vivek Ramaswamy, and I were on a panel. Jonathan Edwards of ALEC moderated the panel on the state of the economy in 2022. And there was an ESG panel after that. But Vivek and I, for some reason, weren't on the panel, although both of us were talking about this issue pretty regularly. But we went back, we wanted to hear. So we went in this room. It was a pretty good sized room. And we thought, there'd be like 10 people there because that's all that ever showed up for any of these ESG meetings. But there were so many people there. Vivek and I went to the front and had to lean against the wall. We couldn't get seats. And there were actually people, these are legislators. There were 3,000 people at our talk. And I don't know how many people showed up to hear this, but they were lined up down the hall. I think they set TVs outside so people could hear this. And the questions were good and the people were attentive. And I said to Vivek at the time, I said, something changed. We're actually getting the word out. Now, even at that point, if you had told me that by today we'd be at the point where these asset management firms were withdrawing from these net zero organizations, that banks were withdrawing from the net zero organizations, that companies were out there dropping their DEI programs. DEI really is the S in ESG. So you say ESG, you're covering DEI, which is another newspeak term. But people are dropping these DEI programs that like they're on fire, like they're in the middle of the Pacific Palisades and the winds are kicking up. They're walking away. Now, it's a ruse. They're still pursuing the policies, but they're at least not using these kind of innocuous phrases because we've told people what they mean. And states passed legislation, fiduciary duty legislation. Heritage had a model bill. ALEC did. They were very similar. Now, 14 states, I think, passed that bill. There have been boycott legislation passed out of Texas. There's been lawsuits filed. There was just a 70-page House Judiciary Committee report on BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard being involved in a cartel that was violating the antitrust laws. They were conspiring together to bring down the energy sector, basically, and to increase the cost of energy. And I think they may have some problems with that report once the Trump administration takes office. We'll see. They have to make their own decisions, but there's a lot of pressure. But they're still not going to look. These collectivists never give up. They haven't given up since 1867 with Das Kapital. The first volume was published. We've been fighting them ever since. We'll be fighting them. My kids will be fighting them. Our grandkids will be fighting them. So we can't let up on this. We have to be very diligent. But we made some progress. You and I were talking earlier. As you said, we won the battle. No, we're just still in a war.
I want to come back to what's ahead in two ways. Number one, policies we can expect from the Trump-Vance administration. And secondly, maybe as I like to call it, looking around the corner, which is our shorthand way here of Heritage saying, once we've secured a policy victory, let's look around the corner and see what the radical left has in store. But before we get into that, one of the customs I have in this show, Andy, is to ask people how they got to do what they're doing. And I've been really, in the few years we've gotten to know each other, I've really been looking forward to asking you that on this show because I know a little bit about it. In other words, everyone has a story and the guests make this show because guests here have a great American story. And how did Andy Puzder become not just, I would argue, one of the experts and great advocates for common sense investing, but also known as a corporate and business leader?
Oh, well, it was kind of an interesting story. I was a trial attorney, went to Washington University Law School, had to work my way through, which was interesting, but got through and got got a good job, became a trial lawyer, commercial trial lawyer, and I represented. I became general counsel for Fidelity National Financial and a guy named Bill Foley, who was the CEO of that company, still is the CEO. It's a big, huge entrepreneur. And we invested in CKE restaurants. I had been Carl Karcher's attorney. He was the founder of CKE. And we bought Hardee's. CKE bought Hardee's. I actually was the lawyer that did the deal. I closed the deal to buy Hardee's. But the stock, when we bought Hardee's, the then current operating team didn't have an answer for what Hardee's problems were. And Carl's stock went from, I think, $42 after the deal closed down to about $2. And during the drop, I had made some comments about what I thought the company should do. And I said I didn't think what we were doing would work. And everybody said, yeah, Andy, go argue a lawsuit or buy a company or something. We'll take care of the restaurants here. And then when there was a shareholders meeting, and I was the secretary of the company. This was CKE Restaurants. I was at Fidelity and CKE. And Bill Foley and the directors were in the corner. Bill called me over and said, Andy, come here. I said, so what's up? He said, well, you're going to be the president of Hardee's. And I said,
not what you were expecting to hear that day.
No, not at all. I said, excuse me, I'm going to be the what? And Byron Allenbaugh used to run Ralph's Markets in California, a really, really good guy, came over and said, no, he was also on the board. He said, no, Bill, if he's going to be the president, he's going to be president and CEO of Hardee's because you had your shot. And Bill laughed. Bill was a friend and Byron was a friend. He laughed and he said, all right, Andy, you're the CEO and president of Hardee's. I said, why? He said, well, you're the only guy who knew this wouldn't work. So I became the president and CEO of Hardee's. About 6 months later, I became president and CEO of the whole company and left 17 years later with a company that had been public with New York Stock Exchange for 10 years, went private with a private equity firm called Apollo, sold it to another private equity firm called Roark. And we had a company that did about over 4 billion system-wide in revenue and had restaurants in 43 states and 40 foreign countries. So it had been a pretty successful for 17 years. I don't think anybody thought I'd last a year. So anyway, that's
all you knew was that what was working or supposed to work wasn't working. You didn't have a plan for what would work, right?
No plan. I had to walk into that meeting. I didn't even know I was going to be the CEO. But it turned out it was helpful that I wasn't a restaurant guy because I went in and I wanted everything explained to me. I wanted to understand why we did everything. And they said, oh, we've been doing this for years. I said, next guy that tells me we've been doing this for years will be fired. I want to know why we're doing it and why we've done it for years. And I think that got us all to think. And it worked out pretty well. I say the company became very successful, or private equity firms wouldn't have bought us and sold us. They would have not have touched us. So it was a good experience. And I also was, I was, as you said, I come from a very working class background in Cleveland, Ohio. My dad was a car salesman, had 5 kids, and didn't have money for me to go to college or law school. So I had to work through both. And I really respect the fact that we have a country where a working class kid like me, I don't think there's ever been a country in the history of the world where a working class kid like me could have aspired to the level of success that I was able to achieve other than the United States. And so after, even while I was a CEO, I began to fight for these free market concepts with a lot of writing in the Wall Street Journal and a lot of appearances on Fox. And then just continued that since I retired in 2017. And I've kind of even picked up the pace a little bit on defending capitalism and opposing collectivism or socialism.
I want to get back to the book momentarily, but I also like to ask guests, because so many members of our audience are younger and they're looking for advice from successful men and women. What business or leadership or life lessons, not just when you were running CKE, maybe going back to when you were a trial attorney, maybe since you retired, would you pass along to people in the audience who are always looking for good advice from great people?
Really, just do something you love. I loved being a trial lawyer. I mean, it's a young man's game or a young woman's game. It's a young person's game. So I was, when I got to be in my 40s, I was okay moving on to being more of a corporate lawyer. But find what you love and just work hard at it. And opportunities will present themselves. Don't feel like you're missing something, or you've been there a week and you ought to be vice president. Get in there, work hard. And opportunities will present themselves, and when they do, take advantage and make your move and be willing to take risks. We're a country where everybody. I think what people miss a lot is there's this push towards equity, which means that everybody in a sense is equal, right? And you and your equality of results. That's not really what this country's been built on. It's not really what made it great. It's not really why all of our ancestors immigrated to the United States. It's because here you have a chance to be whatever God wanted you to be. You know, whatever you were empowered to be. Here you will have the chance to do that. Had I been born in, had my grandfather stayed in the Austro-Hungarian Empire and not come to the United States, I'd probably be a bald and toothless farmer sitting on a porch in Slovakia or Hungary or something, rather than sitting here having this conversation with you. And but more importantly, people like Elon Musk wouldn't have come here. People like Steve Jobs wouldn't have been as successful as they were. People like Henry Ford wouldn't have been as successful as they were. They might have died farmers or residents of South Africa, which is what Musk was. Nothing wrong with South Africa, but they don't have the same potential that you have if you come to the United States. And their potential to help society, their potential to build all of our futures, make all of our futures better, their contributions would have been lost, which is why human civilization for 5,000 years made extremely little progress. But since 1820, the world has we've gone from 1 billion people to 8 billion people, and we've reduced not only the number of people living in poverty, but the percentage of people living in poverty. We've gone from something like 87% of the people living in extreme poverty in 1820 to about 8 to 9% today. Now, we'd like it to be zero. That's going to be a tough number to hit, but particularly when we have countries like Iran and Venezuela and China and Russia, the former Soviet Union, where people really don't have the same opportunities that they have here. But as long as we can keep opportunities open and people can continue to improve their lives and be rewarded for improving other people's lives, which is the only way in a capitalist economy that you make any money. You're rewarded to the extent you benefit others, whether you're running a pizza joint or a hamburger joint or you're Elon Musk and creating car companies and rocket ship companies. You benefit to the extent other people benefit from your efforts. And that's what makes this country great. And I think what will keep it great.
And an entrepreneur, whether he or she's doing their business on a really small scale or on an international scale, who plies their trade well and is a good entrepreneur and provides a great product or service for good value and therefore is financially rewarded, is serving the common good, because just by definition, we're self-interested beings in the best sense of that description, and we're going to purchase goods and services that elevate our quality of life. So much so, just thinking about your comments about the people who've been lifted out of poverty over the last several decades, the correlation between access to free markets, also access to clean, reliable, abundant energy sources are very, very important. Those correlations are very close. And this is really not only the problem with, but the injustice of the ESG movement. And so swerving back into the book, what's going to happen now? What do you anticipate from a policy point of view the Trump-Vance administration doing to take advantage of the battles that have been won at the state level, a little bit at the federal level over the last couple of years?
So we had to fight at the state level over the past 4 years, because with the Biden administration in office, they were very supportive of this ESG movement and actually worked with BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard to try and implement some of these policies. In fact, they took a regulation that Gene Scalia had gotten passed when he was Secretary of Labor under President Trump that made it very, very clear that Arisa, which is the Employment Retirement Income Security Act, which is the federal law that protects everybody that is involved in a private pension fund. That law was enacted to stop corruption, because there were some pension funds you may recall back in the 60s and 70s, the Teamsters Pension Fund was doing a lot of investing in Las Vegas, and people were suspicious of their motives. Now, by the way, those investments turned out to be pretty good. But at the time, it looked like they were investing in these sort of nefarious things. And so they passed this law, the Employee Retirement Income Security Act, in 1974. And it makes it very clear that if you invest money for a pension fund, your sole responsibility, your sole duty, your sole obligation is to maximize returns for those investors. Now, I think it's a very strong argument that that is not what's been happening in this country over the past 4 years. That is not what's been happening with these asset management firms. And that's something that should be litigated. We actually, as I said, we got these fiduciary duty bills passed at the state level, the Heritage model and the ALEC model. And there weren't a lot of difference between the two, and everybody worked together on them. But 14 states have passed those. We've now got litigation out there in Tennessee and Mississippi and other states based on the fiduciary duty obligation. We've got 11 states that filed an antitrust claim. We've got this House Judiciary report that should be something I would think the antitrust division under Attorney General Bondi, when she is confirmed, should look at very carefully. So that we will be able to counteract at least some of what they're doing, at least slow them down, if not stop them. And I think I think we can stop them. It's just it's going to require federal legislation, although the state legislation has been very effective. I mean, it's really what I would credit for what's happened so far is the group that I call the resistance, and our ability to get this legislation passed and to inform people as to what was actually going on with stakeholder capitalism and this champagne social justice agenda, which is this ESG agenda, which would be devastating for the world's poor. It would devastate the working and middle class, but would destroy poor. I mean, this agenda, when you're talking about making these changes for climate change, for example, that's not going to help the poor people living in Ghana. It's not going to help poor people living in the United States. It will benefit rich people who can afford energy and afford what they want, their air conditioning and their jets, no matter what happens, which are a lot of the people that are pushing these initiatives. But it'd be very devastating for the world's population. I think 40% of the world's food supply depends on carbon-based fertilizers, for example. That's how we've been able to feed 8 billion people on this planet. So I think the future, we have won a battle. We haven't won the war. I think my favorite quote, is from Winston Churchill, when we started to win World War II, he said, this is not the end. This is not the beginning of the end, but it is perhaps the end of the beginning. I think we are perhaps at the end of the beginning in this fight, but we have to keep it up.
Look around the next corner for us. You and I both know well that when the radical left takes some defeats, and they certainly have, in no small part because of your own work on this, that they don't go away. And as you said earlier, the philosophical foundation for this is collectivism, and the collectivists have not slept since 1867, it seems. So what might you predict we need to be aware of? And really, of course, from a policy point of view, but also just from sort of an ordinary, everyday American point of view, because this is something that negatively affects everyone.
Well, I think we need to watch very carefully how publicly traded companies are compensating the officers of the company. For example, at Boeing, people should have, I don't know why Boeing, I don't want to be critical of anybody that runs a company. It's been very difficult. It's very difficult to run a large company. But Boeing a few years ago was, and I may get the percentages wrong on this, but they were compensating, their bonus plan for their executives was like 75 or 85% profits and 15 or 25% safety and DEI. Like safety and DEI were like, diversity.
Because they go hand in hand.
Yeah, which really kind of blows you. I mean, this is when, planes are like falling out of the sky. I mean, pieces are falling off of them. Boeing's reputation is kind of in the tank here. And instead of, you would have thought somebody at Boeing would have said, hey, maybe we should have a 100% bonus based on safety to send a message to the American people that we're really concerned, or worldwide, that we're really concerned about safety. That's what we want to do. No, they've got a plan that basically is if you use 3 bolts instead of 4 bolts on a panel, well, the profit will be more. So you can maybe make some bonus that way. And then if you do some DEI hires, well, we're in pretty good shape. You get like 100% of your bonus, which is an absurd way to approach this. American companies should not be bonusing or compensating officers based upon compliance with either DEI or ESG criteria, particularly these net zero goals. If a company is still pursuing a bonus plan that benefits people for meeting net zero goals, then people should know that something's wrong there and they're not looking out for your best interest if you're an investor. This is not an effort to increase the returns on your investment in that company. It's an effort to comply with a leftist cultural agenda objective.
So, final question. It's a question or a version of a question I ask most guests, and it's about the future of the country. I know you to be an optimist, but someone who is an optimist based on real substance. Americans aged 35 and 40 and younger are pessimistic about the future. Perhaps there's a little more spring in their step after the election, and we're certainly hopeful from a policy point of view with what President Trump will bring in. But even still, these Americans say, you know what? When it comes to the free market, it's been too corrupted and bastardized. The collusion between big government and big business is too much. Our institutions have deteriorated so much. They're actually a pessimistic lot. And on one level, I get it, but on the other level, as you know, I'm very hopeful. But given your business experience, the thought that you've put into resuscitating true free market principles, which you explain so well in the book, how would you respond to that relatively large group of Americans who are skeptical about business and the free market in the 21st century?
So I spent a lot of time speaking at colleges and universities and to groups that are focused on young Americans, like Heritage, like YAF, Young Americans Foundation.
Great group.
And you do get some of that pessimism, but people need to understand that and I've got a chapter in the book. It's chapter 6. It's called An Economic Miracle. That really explains the incredible benefits that humanity has reaped from this free market capitalist system that's been in effect. I go back to 1820, and I think that's probably a good year to start because there's good data starting back then from the World Bank as well as from some of the economists who are historical economists. But you really can see the benefits of this. And I think one of there are different arguments that they make. One of them is that there's all these billionaires, there's these rich people, they're stealing from us, they're doing this. Well, Henry Ford, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, they did become tremendously successful, but they became tremendously successful because they provided us with tremendous benefits. Unlike a socialist country, which a lot of these people advocate for, they didn't become wealthy by stealing from us. They didn't become wealthy by oppressing us. They became wealthy by providing us with automobiles that the common man and woman could drive, or iPhones where you can carry this incredible computing power that, more powerful than what sent people to the moon when I was in my early college days. You can carry that around in your hand now. Or you got a guy like Elon Musk where we're, not only electric vehicles, but you're sending rockets, into space more than every country. 80% of the rockets that went up last year were from SpaceX. That includes China, Europe, the United States. I mean, the things that entrepreneurs can do in this country are absolutely incredible. The other thing I hear a lot about when I do these talks is healthcare. I'll get people will come in, young people, and will say, Andy, I agree with what you said, but really people are dying in the streets. I mean, everybody should be entitled to healthcare. It's like a right, it's a human right. My response is generally, number one, nobody's dying in the streets. I mean, Ronald Reagan said that when you go to he implemented a policy with Congress where if you are sick and you go to emergency room, they can't ask you whether you can pay. They have to treat you. So healthcare needs to be improved in this country, but not because we're India. We don't have people dying in the streets in here. Now there's homeless people there, and it's a problem to address. But that is a health care issue. But not a people dying in the street issue. Let's talk about things we can't agree with. Could we agree that healthcare should be less expensive and higher quality? And I always said, yeah, we want higher quality, less expensive healthcare. I said, so what's the only thing in the history of the world that has ever increased quality and decreased price? And none of them ever know the answer. I mean, it's like everybody kind of stares at you with their mouth open. The answer is competition. Competition is the only thing that increases quality and decreases price. When you want to stick government into healthcare, you're taking the one thing we know will decrease quality and increase price, And you want to put that in a system where you want to increase quality and decrease price, and you want to remove competition, which is the only thing that can do that. So these young people have to have a better understanding of that the system under which they have been raised, under which they've thrived, and their parents thrived, and their grandparents and their great-grandparents, is a free market system where people are able to reach to the limits of their abilities, reach to the limits of their desires and their ambitions, and where competition helps increase the price, increase the quality of goods, and decrease the price of goods. And this has been a tremendous benefit to everybody who's lived in this country since the early 1800s.
Which is why everyone needs to read your book, A Tyranny for the Good of Its Victims, The Ugly Truth About Stakeholder Capitalism.
I hope they'll enjoy reading it as much as I enjoyed writing it. These are very therapeutic experiences, but it really was a fun book to write because you sort of put things together in your head that you think you understand a subject. Write a book about it. Then you'll walk away, with more educated than when you started. So I hope people will take advantage of it. The Tyranny for the Good of Its Victims I stole that from C.S. Lewis, as you probably know, who was writing how that he would rather be oppressed by a robber baron or a dictator than somebody that thought that they were oppressing you for your own benefit. Like if you're doing a tyranny for the good of the victims, they just never relent. A robber baron might relent on a day or two, but the people that think they're acting in your best interest will not relent. And that's what we're dealing with. These people think they know how to run our lives, our country, our planet better than we do. And so they don't want us running it. And we need to change that.
Andy Puzder, thanks for writing the book. Thanks for being a great colleague and friend, everything you're doing to save freedom, self-governance, and free enterprise in the United States.
Well, thank you, Kevin. And same back at you. You're doing a spectacular job here at Heritage. It really is an honor to be involved.
Thanks for being part of it. I told you, if you didn't know Andy Puzder, you would like this conversation. And if you already did know about Andy Puzder, of course, that was a great reminder. Thanks for being part of the show. Thanks for keeping your chin up. Yes, we have some work to do in this country as always, but we're winning and we're going to keep winning. And if you look around the corner, as Andy says, there are some obstacles there, but we're going to prevail against them too. Take care.
The Kevin Roberts Show is brought to you by more than 10 million supporters of the Heritage Foundation. The executive producer is Crystal Kate Bonham. Sound design by Lauren Evans, Mark Guiney, Tim Kennedy, and Joseph von Spakovsky. For more information and to subscribe, please visit heritage.org.